Under there, behind your hair, everywhere. I see you. I see you. Turn on eyes, can't tell lies, empathize. I see you.
Talking to Wade Oberlin. First time we've ever met via Zoom. We've chatted a little bit by email. And Wade, I first became aware of you through your fantastic Twitter feed, which I think is it called the Real Richard? No, the Richard Meltzer Fan Club, basically, right?
Yep.
Incredible. I want to talk a little bit about that for sure. I wouldn't, I'll try and flash it on the screen a little bit as well. But I think I'm calling into you. You're in Ohio. I'm in Toronto. Thanks for joining me on this tonight. And we're here
Yeah,
to
thanks for
talk
having me.
some Richard Meltzer and some aesthetics of rock. So, Wade, tell me and tell anyone watching this godforsaken thing a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a fanatic. I started the Richard Meltzer fan club. I had a Twitter account during COVID and I didn't know what to do with it. And I can't just post, whatever. I mean, some people are really good at just, making little quips about their day-to-day life or whatever. But my day-to-day was I was really interested in picking up Meltzer books that I didn't own already. Um, I think the most obscure one I had was like postnatal trash, and I ended up picking up Prickly Heat and Cold and the Ugliest Buildings of Los Angeles, and um, the 17 Insects Can Die in Your Heart.
Wow.
And I was just like, I really loved it, and I just wanted to share it, and so it just sort of took off from there. I forget exactly what my first few posts were about it, but I just knew I wanted to share bits and pieces because so much of these go for like, kind of obscene amounts of money. And, Simon Reynolds, he has this concept of charity,
Hmm.
and I think that's kind of important. And with archive.org, which I utilize a lot, I found so much information and I just felt like consolidating it would be the way to go.
And did you just start it like entirely on your own? Did you have any contact with Richard Meltzer himself or anyone in his orbit, or was this just something completely, no, I'm just going to go ahead and do this?
On Facebook, I think there's a guy named Michael Hughes, and he runs like a small Richard Meltzer page on Facebook that
Hmm.
updates, you know, every once in a while. And so I got in contact with him to get his mailing address. But I'd actually met Meltzer back in 2016 when I still lived on the West Coast, and that was at his 70th birthday reading, and that was at a place called Turn 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 in Portland. And I had driven down from Everett, this town north of Seattle, with my girlfriend at the time. And at that point, I loved Gulcher. I had just finished The Night Alone, and that's the book I ended up taking down with me. And we got to the venue really early, and he was standing there with his friends, and I'm like, oh my God, there he is, like right over there. And beelined over to the bar, thinking I'm not going to bother him. And he came up to me
Hmm.
and just started talking, and he saw the book in my hand, and we talked about it for a bit, and a few other things before, the show got started. And um, the reading was great. I forget exactly how long it went for, but he went through, I mean, pretty much the bulk of like Spielgusher and stuff like that. So if you're familiar with the Spielgusher album, that's a joy to see in front of you.
So he was doing it unaccompanied, or
Yeah.
okay.
And I think apart from that, he also read stuff from Autumn Rhythm, like about his mother, because his birthday is around Mother's Day.
Hmm.
And so he read, the piece about his mom from Autumn Rhythm.
And
And
so, okay, no, sorry, go ahead.
oh yeah, I mean, but And afterwards, I remember talking to him and I got a picture with him. Maybe I can bring it up. We can flash it on the screen, but I'm
Right.
wearing my a pill shirt, Public Image Limited shirt, and yeah, and it was just a real fun time. I think we stayed one more day and I visited pals and I picked up my copy of Autumn Rhythm there. It was an advanced copy. But so anyways, like I had been in Washington and I had read and reread, his horror collection and Gulcher. And when I moved back home, it was 2019. And I had also been interested in like Slash magazine and punk stuff. And, I had all that still on the brain. And I found out that this book about Claude Bessy, which was written by this guy named Ivar, where he interviewed his wife, Philomena, had come out in Spain. And it was only in Spanish. And I have it here. I don't think too many people know about this yet. But
No, no.
I think it was released in 2019, and I ordered a copy. And without much thought, I just started transcribing it. This is all pre-fan club stuff
Mhm.
because I wanted to read it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of interesting stuff that you can't find in a lot of LA punk books that's mentioned in there, plus some other little interview snippets so that were done around 2018 or 19 or whatever. And so once I had worked with a translator, um, who was the husband of a Spanish
Wow.
professor I knew, uh, I had it all together, and I thought I'll ask Mike Hughes on Facebook if I can mail him, send him a letter. And so, I sent him a letter and just told him, hey, thanks for all your writs and stuff like that. And it would be probably a year or so later. Yeah, it was like early 2022. I had already been running the fan club for a bit. I went back to the West Coast and I saw Meltzer again. And we had a much longer talk that time, and we were masked up because it was still COVID times. And told him about the fan club, and he seemed to approve.
Great.
I wanted approval on it, and but he's been very, very nice to, like, I don't want to say work with, but just very affable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you know, does he actually, I mean, when I interviewed him in 2000, and obviously that's much more infancy of the web and all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
He was very like, this is basically Satan's Cove, the web sort of thing. I mean, he did what he had to do on it completely out of necessity.
Mhm.
Does he actually like in any? I assume he doesn't have a Twitter feed, but does he in any sense engage with the site? Like, does he look at it, or do you feed him stuff that you find, or
Well, I mean, I think at that point, anyone could go up and look at Twitter, right? But I
right,
think
right
now to do it
now?
the way that it works now,
Yeah,
yeah, you can't just look at it. You have to have an account. So I don't know if he
no.
sees everything now at this point. Um, but I keep in touch because, I call him probably once a month
Mm,
and just to see how he's doing, and sometimes I have questions, burning questions, and I just got
yeah,
to know some
yeah.
stuff.
That's awesome. So you actually have a dialogue with him, and he's been in Oregon for some time, or in Portland for some time, right?
Yeah. If I remember, I think it's probably around like 94 or 95 he's been there.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, that sounds about right. And
Okay.
I think the Portland times are a little bit more undocumented than anything. I mean, there's another zine I got here that I think this is kind of like the bridge between The Night Alone and Autumn Rhythm. It's called Osmotic Tongue Pressure. Have you seen this?
No, no,
Yeah.
definitely not.
So it was put together by this guy named M.T. Kinney. And the first song or piece on the Spielgusher album is mentions M.T. Kinney if you go and listen to it. And there's a pretty long interview in it where he just talks about aesthetics of rock and Gulcher and Patti Smith and what he does in Portland, stuff he's read. Um, and it's just really good. Um, it's a really nice interview. I'll hold up a picture of the. It's also printed wrong. Like the intro happens.
I have that. I have
Yeah.
that. I have a photocopy of it.
Okay.
I was going to give you a little story about that eventually, but yes, I do have not about that particular piece, but I have a whole
Mhm.
bunch of Meltzer material. And I actually wanted to go over it with you at some point because some of it may be of use to you that you can post on your Twitter feed. But that is one piece I do have. So I have read that actually. That's pretty fantastic, but it's a long time ago that I read it actually.
Yeah.
So
Well, let me ask you something. Do you have your copies of Aesthetics right next to you?
yeah, well, I have the one, but all my Meltzer books are pretty close by actually. So yes, I do have my 80. Is it 86 or 87? I'm always getting that confused. I think it's 87. Or no, I think it's 86 actually.
Yeah.
87, 87. Yeah. So I've got that one. Yeah.
So I had a question. The first one, which is what I got,
Yeah, I've got that as well. Yeah.
is dedicated to Ronnie Hoffman.
Right.
Does that remain throughout the other
Yes.
two copies?
Yeah. One thing I can say, apart from the preface and the introduction or the forward, the introduction, whatever, whatever the difference is, the Greil Marcus piece and Meltzer's own introduction, which is really fantastic. It is carbon copy. Like even like the page is like aligned 100%, and I think even it might be the exact same font.
Yeah.
Yeah, like just looking at it, I feel that it's actually, I don't know if it actually looks like it's the exact same font. And yeah, it's still
Mhm.
dedicated to Ronnie Hoffman. I was thinking about that name recently because in some of my recent sort of looking at the stuff, I'm like, who is Ronnie Hoffman? And then I did see her name come up in a few things. I think she might
Mhm.
be mentioned in a couple pieces that might be in the horror compilation. I can't remember, but I guess she's. I don't. You probably know more about it than I do, but I guess was she like a girlfriend at the time or something?
Yeah, and
I take it.
I believe she was a photographer of some note.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I believe I don't own the Daniel Johnston cover one, but I've actually
Mm.
you can kind of take a preview of it in Amazon, and I think it's the same thing. In fact, I think it's actually a complete carbon copy of this edition, just with a different cover. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I owned that one at one point and I
okay,
don't know where it went.
okay.
Yeah, I think it was left behind or maybe I gave it to a friend and never retrieved it. But
So I can't remember if you said in just a few minutes back. So what was the first? What was actually your introduction to Meltzer's writing? What was the first book that you saw, or the first piece by him that you came across?
yeah, so I think I heard Meltzer's voice before I actually saw
Right.
anything in print. Like, so I'm near Dayton, Ohio, but when I was out in Washington and I was like, had an iPod and was like downloading stuff off of blogs or using iTunes or whatever, like I got really into guided by voices and I was really, stoked to hear that they were, oh, look, they're from Dayton. And so I started listening to pretty much whatever they had. And so I came across the Tropic of Nipples EP. And, Meltzer plays a big part in that. And I think there's even Vom songs on it, like on the CD version. And I forget if that was what I had. But in any case, I had heard him before I saw anything. And then I think I picked up a book called Our Band Could Be Your Life.
Right.
And it had mentioned him in relation to Minutemen, which I was enjoying at that time. And yeah, once I got into Meltzer, I think I started with the horror collection.
Mhm.
Uh, I noticed that he liked Minutemen and he liked Cat Power, and he wrote stuff about Blurt, which ended up being another like favorite band. I absolutely adore Blurt. I think they're great. Um, And it's just like, wow, yeah, this guy is he just sort of understands sonically what this is what I've been craving this whole time, because when you're into like the British bands and they're kind of stylized and stuff, there's something there. It's not bad or anything. It's not exactly what you're craving, as far as sound goes.
Why is
Um,
that, do you think? Are you sort of suggesting like a distance or something that you sometimes get from some British pop? I mean, that's
sure.
kind of a theme that sort of pops up in writing about British pop for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, it's just like if you listen to like Martin Hannett mixes, like
Hmm.
some people love that how it's mixed and stuff. But then if you listen to like the live album, like Still or something, it's so much better, in my
Hmm.
opinion. Like that's how it ought to be sounding. Some people would think that like Martin Hannett stuff sounds like Bowie low, or
Hmm.
something like that. And, it's interesting to hear, but I think it was just like a stylistic change that kind of it gets away from like the frisson and separates it into like hard panning stereo stuff.
So what was it in Meltzer's when you got to the words on the page specifically? So Whore, just like the rest, was your introduction, I guess, on a large scale to his writing.
Yeah.
Um, what what was it in his voice, I guess, or in his use of words that just compelled you to continue for years to go down the rabbit hole?
I mean, he'll say things like gotta, or use a lot of enclitics and it's just
Enclitics. I don't know that word actually. Tell me that one.
enclitic. He's actually in a mag called enclitic, and
Oh
enclitic is
wow.
like it's like a word broken up with an apostrophe, you know.
Ah,
Not
okay.
e
Yeah,
not
I
even
know
broken
what you
up.
mean since you're
Yeah.
describing it, but okay.
Um, yeah, I got it on hand.
I didn't know
This
there
one's
was a word for that. Okay,
yeah, I didn't intend to bring this one up, but uh this I
great.
think has
Paul Krasner on the cover there. Wow.
yeah, mass murder, Dodgers 88. Okay.
So Meltzer is in that issue then, obviously, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and let me find the piece in it. 100 Years of Yeast
Wow.
fiction. I believe this made it into The Night Alone, maybe. And there's a
Okay.
nice photo of him in a striped
Oh,
shirt.
great. Wow.
Yeah, you don't
That's
really see
great.
that one too often.
Yeah.
But in my
Meltzer's
opinion,
remarkably photogenic, like he's a
yeah,
really good looking guy. Like there aren't a lot of rock critics. And I know he used to get compared to Robert De Niro. And there was
yeah,
a certain period in his life where I could absolutely see the resemblance. So,
yeah, or looking like Ulysses S. Grant,
oh
which
yeah,
is what he said later.
yeah,
What color are his eyes? I don't know. He's always wearing shades. Is he tall? Well, I gotta look up. Yeah, well, I hear he's bad. He's good bad, but he's not evil.
And
so go back a bit then. So you liked his use of language, his wordplay, I guess, in Horror Like the Rest. Is that
yeah,
kind of what you're saying,
and
basically?
yeah, it was just like entertaining to read and fun to read. Gulcher, in particular, like talking about monster movies or like the Lucky's thing, like testing out which ones run out first because he didn't smoke cigarettes and stuff. But um, just like doing these things that, might be done out of like boredom or tedium. It's post-rock, like where do we go from here?
Hmm.
Boxing, monster movies, which he really, I don't know, just went back to or kept close or whatever. Um, but yeah, it's just like, and the whole cultural idea is like it's culture for people in sweatpants like me,
That's
at this
great.
moment. But yeah, the horror collection was great, and then learning about punk was great. I'd say that's also one of the big things is LA punk, jazz, are those are things that I kind of really enjoy and hold dear and anything that came after that that he seemed to show interest in, even if it was like, all right, time to learn about classical music, it's like, okay, I'm on board because I trust your judgment,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
there's a San Diego Reader piece where he talks about Schonenberg
Hmm.
um, and compares his stuff to, well, basically saying this is like a template for what monster movies would be doing with like serialism, atonalism, and stuff like that. And, so it's educational, it's entertaining. He could be a humorist, he could be a poet. And when I talked to Eddie Flowers about Meltzer, he said he picked up his book of poetry and he said, well, I don't really like poetry, but I like this. And I think the anecdote was something along the lines of like, Meltzer said, yeah, well, I don't like it that much, but I thought I'd write my own. And and there it is. And that might have even been still been like pre-beatnik stuff. I mean, he'd written poems going back pretty far, but he got better and better.
Yeah, it's interesting. I find his whole like sort of trajectory as a writer just kind of so fascinating. Because I don't think well, when I interviewed him in 2000, he said something that struck me, but then I realized, well, he did actually already sort of mention that in the foreword to the Aesthetics of Rock that he wrote in the 80s, and it just, slipped by me or something, or I didn't sort of meditate on it. But he did mention to me, while writing the Aesthetics of Rock, that he basically didn't even think of it as writing. He didn't think of himself as a writer. It was, maybe I'd say it's more of a mechanical thing. The typewriter and the piece of paper was the means of sort of pouring out, his
Mhm.
feelings and emotions and insights about this music. But it wasn't like he set out, at least I believe, according to himself, to be a quote unquote writer. And then I think he mentioned that it was actually years before he really even made that conscious sort of decision or had the sudden flash of aware. It was kind of hilarious the way he said it in the interviews. Like, I woke up one day, looked in the mirror, and said, I guess you're, I guess you're a writer," which sort of cracked me up the way he said that. But I just, but and so yeah, and then he discovers like actual, or starts to read, not discovers, but starts to really read seriously, I guess, the actual, great literature and all that, and then gets into poetry. So it's just kind of neat. Like he didn't doesn't sound like he kind of grew up thinking I want to be a writer, and yet he wrote the first truly great treatise on rock and roll. So it's kind of fascinating.
When, as a sophomore, I got a D and an F in 2 math courses, I decided enough of this already, and became a philosophy major. And it was I was only when I started writing philosophy papers that I, on any level, thought of myself as writing. I mean, I didn't doing mere book reports and biology reports didn't feel quite the same. And so I would do. Just to cut to the chase, I didn't think of myself as a writer as such until I had been doing it professionally for about 5 years. I just looked at myself in the mirror one day and I said, I guess you're a writer.
I think because he had Alan Caprow as an art teacher and this guy Donald Goodman as a philosopher. And
Goodman, I
it,
don't know much about. I know a little bit about Capro, and I'm really interested in him. So, who was Donald Goodman? I'm sorry to interject, but I would like to
yeah.
get into
Well,
that a little.
I just know him as a professor at Stony Brook, and
Okay.
he probably just went into philosophy, mostly like Greeks and things like that. And I'm still not up on my philosophy,
Yeah.
which is part of the challenge in talking about aesthetics, almost. I mean, except I would say if there's a philosophy book that I've been drawn to the most, it's probably been, this one's been one of them. But yeah, I'm just like, I thought Gulcher was the book I had identified with the most. And aesthetics, I've almost been working my way backwards to it now, but I appreciate and listen to and study, the early rock and roll stuff more and more. And yeah, like I said, I've been working my way backwards.
Yeah. Yeah. And so here's a question I feel like it's really critical when it comes to talking about Meltzer. How how do you feel that aesthetics of rock, and you've kind of worked your way backwards, which I don't think is true for me. I think aesthetics probably would have been the first thing I read in earnest by him. I would have read some pieces here and there before I got to aesthetics. I got it got to me through the 80s reprint, basically, although I'd been familiar with his name for a long time. Um, but how do you have a sense of how you feel that book fits into like the overall sort of Melter story? I mean, I've got an idea on that, but I'd rather let you spin off on that first if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, I think it came out of college. It came out of the fact that he was already doing papers there. And then there were other people working on rock books, like Lillian Roxon and her encyclopedia book. And I don't know about this guy Nick Cohn. He did like
Yeah,
Bop Bop a Loop Bop, and
great book.
you know, Tosh's is probably working on books. I don't really know. The timeline is a little fuzzy for me there, but I would just say he'd already had it, and he probably saw a chance to strike it, and just figured he'd go for it and have a book. And it took a while for it to be published. Maybe it was the
Mhm.
first rock book, but it wasn't really in sequence as far as things being released. And
That's right.
I've got some issues of Crawdaddy where there's excerpts from aesthetics, and I think there was even a magazine called Oz that might have had pieces from aesthetics of rock too.
Mhm.
Really awesome looking magazine.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Did
but
you say Oz, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I think I've got a paperback. Since you mentioned that, God, I should get it off my shelf at some point. I think I've got two paperback
Mhm.
compilations that I found years ago at a used bookstore, and I'm pretty sure Meltzer is in at least one of those. I think it was a Richard Goldstein
Mhm.
edited thing. I think he might have been the brains behind that, and very very short lived. I think so.
Yeah. Well, yeah, with Oz, I believe there's issue number 8, if I remember correctly, has Ranch epistemology in it as part of the
Right.
title. And yeah, that's in there, but it's a really cool looking magazine, like psychedelic looking magazine.
Mhm.
And there's an archive of that online too to check out. Um, but yeah, this crawdaddy here, I was happy to look at and find. I found this in a local store, like
Wow.
right down the street from me in Yellow Springs. And in it he's doing a self-interview, which is fun. He was probably doing a self-interview. I think Burroughs ended up doing self-interviews too. You don't know if he was aware of it at the time or not. But asking about tongues, and it says, well, why is there a tongue here as opposed to there? That was a question. Answer, you stupid or something? There isn't. It's all a matter of audience attention and that sort of thing. Like once I did a tongue demonstration for some guys and I put on I Feel Like Homemade Shit by the Fugs, and everybody ignored the standard tongue points I was dealing with. They were just listening for the word shit behind all the gobble gobble. As a moment of forced awareness, the shit point was a tongue.
Mm.
So therefore, the idea of like tongues, focuses, I think, on moments that aren't necessarily musically notated, but just these elements that happen. You can identify almost anything as a tongue. And but with rock, there are more unknown tongues because with recorded music or even muzak and stuff like that, uh, it's hard to pick apart, you know, this distance of stuff. Like on a between like the piano and the drums and the bass and the what have you. And so these unknown tongues are where that frisson is happening. And there's some have more frisson than others, like Blue Cheer,
Mm.
and where it's just like all simultaneity. And when I was reading Joe Carducci too, like I had picked up his rock book around the time I had the horror collection and I think Lester Bang's collection,
Okay.
one of the collections of his stuff. And Carducci, even when he thinks about rock, he thinks about like a nexus of simultaneity, as defining the live aspect of a rock band. But I think AOR had already covered, stuff that was going on in the studio. And the Beatles were the masters of the tongue because they were able to utilize everything so well. And there would be imitators, like say Bee Gees or something, and they wouldn't be able to capture all the tongueness that they were already laying down. So the tongues maybe weren't so unknown anymore,
Wow.
you
So
know?
so you're sort of taking in the unknown tongue. I mean, it's fascinating to me because I
Mhm.
spoke to Tim Ellison a couple weeks ago or whatever, and you watched that interview with him, and it it just like I didn't know how to sort of take the unknown tongue when I first read the aesthetics of rock. And
Mhm.
I sort of, I mean, I knew there was something to it, but I think I just kind of had the assumption that it was a bit of an abstraction. It was just sort of a bit of language to hang some neat ideas about music or to capture some really sort of stunning moments. Um, but when I'm talking to you and to Tim, I'm
Mhm.
getting a much more like an actual kind of real life sense of it being an actual thing. Now it's all, would you
Well,
say
it's like,
it's in the audience perception? I like
yeah,
ultimately,
well,
right?
it's like a defined undefinedness.
Mm,
And that
yeah, yeah.
undefinedness, is like some instrumental things that are mixing together that you don't really know what it is, but you could sort of tack down how long it goes, and so there are longer tongues and shorter tongues, and pauses, that aren't natural to what had come earlier in like a pre-rock context, maybe, because I don't know, with recording things just changed with that. And so I think the focus on singles and what he called like the unit offering, I think in something in the horror collection is it's like a whole world, and it's something offered that you might not get in any other place. And maybe once you know it and you hear it somewhere else, maybe it's not an unknown tongue anymore. Maybe it's a tongue you can define. And I
Mm.
think later too, like I think I saw in a Simon Reynolds interview somewhere, he was talking about how pitchfork writers or online writers at different places are better at um, looking at things sonically and picking things apart, and they'll describe it, kind of literally. And I don't know if that might be okay some of the time, but I remember writing reviews for a blog at a record store, and I thought maybe I wrote only 5 or 10 of them. And I looked back, I had written like nearly 100,
Wow.
and some of them weren't really memorable. It was just fodder. And so much of that stuff is fodder. Who's going to remember you for, just talking about something literally?
Describing the note. Yeah, I know. Well, okay. Don't you feel that sort of, again, interesting because you're sort of giving me a different way to think about this, and it's been a long time since I've read it, but
Hmm.
I felt at times, and I am a fan of the book, but that Joe Carducci's book, with them we're talking about rock and the pop narcotic, obviously,
Hmm.
um, that it had a little bit of that pedantic idea of getting at the music. Like I what you're describing, Simon Reynolds is saying, that the world of music writing is better at, and on that level, he's probably correct. The question is
Yeah.
whether that's a good thing or not. But I feel that that's kind of what Carducci was almost pining for in that book. Or am I misunderstanding him, do
Yeah,
you think?
he might have, yeah, I think he was probably wanting to show people that rock, especially in the live context, because he wanted to work with live bands particularly. SST bands were like live bands, and the way they recorded was, pretty sparse. And, they just captured this live dynamic. He almost sees electric bands with, 3, 4, maybe 5 guys or whoever, to be like a Basie band or an Ellington band or something, and they have to have elements of swing and like some frisson, and he wants that to be documented more over so-called like styler music. And
What
stuff
do you mean styler music?
like Martin Hannett or like a
Right.
Kramer, like sort of produced stuff, you know.
Mhm.
Um, that's just a guess with Kramer, but like that's uh that's what I would see that as. And when it came to, I mean, a big portion of the book isn't really about music, it's about music crits
Yeah,
and
oh
their
yeah, yeah.
perceived mistakes.
Hmm. Oh, it's a
So,
fascinating chapter for sure.
yeah,
My
but
head was coming off when I first read that chapter, and it was both like one of those moments of being completely angered by it, but completely compelled by it, and like just just thought it was like his voice, and it was just fantastic. And I thought it was also completely out of line and ridiculous at the same time, which to me is it can actually be the mark of really good criticism. It goes. I won't. I don't want to try and introduce too much of this right now because it's going to
mhm,
complicate things. But it goes a little bit to the Bob Dobbs idea. You listen to some of the Bob Dobbs stuff I did with on Meltzer, and I'm going to be posting some of that on this new YouTube thing. I hope. But
mhm,
he goes into the idea of tactility, and I think there's something tactile about that response to a book like Joe Carducci's. I feel like I could talk about Joe Carducci's book a lot, but it has been a long time since
mhm.
I've read it.
Yeah, well, it's
Sorry, I
like
think you were going to just cut in there or something.
well, he's a guy that's seen umpteen different flipper shows and black flag shows, so I mean, you've got to have an opinion that comes from that perspective, and
Hmm. Yeah.
and he is the live perspective, and but something that came up, it's a really interesting quote, um, in
Okay,
Rock
wait one
on
second. We're at
Mhm.
less than a minute. I think we're about 40 seconds. So do you want to hold it to the next
Sh
call? Or can you read
yeah,
it quick and then it will still come back?
I'll try. The variables in good rock band's stylistic character may be innumerable, but invariably the art of rock music is found at the superheated nexus in performance, where each musician, while playing his part in the material, hears and feels and anticipates the greater whole as it is being reincarnated. This whole, a multidimensional simultaneity, is at once solid and evanescent. And it goes on, but you know, it's not far from what Meltzer was saying about Blue Cheer years ago, years prior.
Hmm.
And you know, it's something to consider.
everywhere. I see you.